The year is 1982. The Palestinian Liberation Organization is entrenched firmly in Beirut, under siege, surrounded by Israeli forces. For weeks, Israel had been attacking the city from the sea, air, and land, cutting off food, water, and power. The IDF secured several key locations, but Beirut held out. A peace agreement is finally implemented on August 18th. As part of the deal, French troops arrive in Beirut on August 21st. They're followed by U.S. and Italian forces. Their mission, to ensure the PLO leave the Lebanese capital. All in all, 8,500 PLO members are sent to Tunisia. Another 2,500 are sent to other Arab states. Yasser Arafat, leader of the PLO, was in Israel's crosshairs for years. But after multiple failed attempts on his life, the U.S. now acts as his protector. Although Israel failed to kill Arafat, for the PLO, the evacuation from Beirut is a clear, painful loss. For Israel, the relocation of the PLO members meant the group was now vulnerable. 3 years later, Arafat narrowly survives another assassination attempt as the Israeli Air Force bombs his Tunis headquarters. 73 people were killed, but Arafat was saved, out jogging at the time of the attack. Only 9 years after that, 12 years after the PLO left Lebanon, Arafat found his way back to Gaza and the West Bank as a result of the Oslo Accords. Arafat went on to lead the Palestinians in several rounds of failed negotiations with Israel. He died at age 75, again in exile, this time in France, where he'd been hospitalized with a rare blood disorder. French courts have dismissed several attempts to open an investigation into his death, which his supporters blame on Israel.
So let's get to it, gentlemen. Where is the Palestinian Authority heading to? You know the rules. You each get 30 seconds to lay out your initial stance on the matter, and we pick up the conversation right after. So, Mr. Al-Ajrami, please take the lead.
Good evening.
Good evening, sir. So where is the Palestinian Authority heading to in 30 seconds, please?
The Palestinian Authority should lead to a Palestinian independent state. It is the result of Oslo Agreement. If this agreement should get an end, I think the problem here that Oslo Agreement was an interim agreement, but unfortunately became a final status agreement, and this is the problem.
Yes, Dr. Neriah, your take?
Well, one must wait till this leadership passes away. I mean, certainly there will be no change as long as Abbas is the president and the leadership is the one that is still the one that came from Tunis. So there's a need of renewal, and certainly the PLO or the Palestinian Authority will have to fight to survive facing Hamas on the ground.
And last but definitely not least, Mr. Sinijlawi, your thoughts?
Well, if you are talking about the individuals, the leaders themselves, the persons, I can see them very soon packing and going somewhere out. I don't think that the current leaders in the PA are maintaining any kind of popularity. 80% of the population in all polls are asking President Abbas to leave, to resign. 78% of the population say that they are corrupt, and 73% of the population are calling for immediate elections. So I see them packing and going somewhere else.
And before we talk about the present and the future, let's begin with the hindsight, so to speak. If Yasser Arafat would have seen today's state of affairs, what would he say? Is the current Palestinian leadership, quote unquote, true to the original Palestinian cause, Sinijlawi?
Well, I think the current leadership is different than Yasser Arafat. Yasser Arafat was a charismatic leader. He was very attached to the street. He was very popular, and he took courageous steps. He was a true leader. He implemented a strategy. We could have a lot of criticism to some parts of this strategy, but he had a strategy. While the current leadership is living in a bubble, they are totally disattached from the Palestinian street. They live in their own world. There is 150 people in Ramallah who think that they have achieved independence. They have the red carpets, they drive Range Rovers, they have heavy loaded bank accounts all over the world, and they are not related to the street. We can see that they are on the silent mood on whatever is happening, and they have been failed even in trying to cope with the regional changes, with the international changes. President Abbas have been dealing with 5 different American presidents, including the last President Biden, and he has failed with all of them. Nothing has been achieved. Now the PA is simply the club, the club of friends of the coordinator, the COCAT, or the club of the friends of the Shin Bet. Unfortunately, I am as a Fatah activist who has been in prison since the age of 15. I am totally disappointed. I am totally feel that we have been betrayed by this current leadership, especially the generation of the first Intifada. I am now in 15. I am 15 years old. I was in jail in 88 at the age of 15, and I'm now 50 years old. And we can see that the octogenarian leaderships in their 80s and 70s have never left their seats. They are not opening the possibility for the young generation to develop some kind of a new style of leadership.
Mr. Al-Ajrami, what do you think? Same questions. Is the current Palestinian Authority true to the original raison d'etat?
I think if Yasser Arafat is alive, many things may change. First of all, the division between Gaza Strip and West Bank cannot be occur in a period of Yasser Arafat. Although I saw that the collapse of the Palestinian Authority started when Yasser Arafat was the president of the Palestinian Authority, especially after the second Intifada. But Yasser Arafat is very clever to handle the division within the Palestinian society and even with the Arab world. Now we lost the support from the Arab world and maybe partially from the international community. And I think Yasser Arafat will play in other methodology to keep the support from the Arab world and the international community and to be engaged in the regional process as an important factor in this region.
We will talk more about the global standing of the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian cause in a bit. But Dr. Neriah, if we're looking at those past 40 years, how did the Israeli perception or working assumption, so to speak, vis-a-vis Palestinian politics changed over the course of the years?
Well, you know, I was in the negotiating team with Arafat on the Oslo implementation, and at the time we had great expectations. We thought that it was really the beginning of a peaceful settlement and that a transitional period will follow, and then afterwards we'll have to discuss the final status of the territories. Unfortunately, from the two sides, the Israeli and Palestinians did not trust each other. Arafat did everything, every possible mistake. When entering the territories, he hid in his car 2 terrorists that were involved in the Munich massacre, and he just smuggled weapons. And you know, and this was only the beginning. And then afterwards, Arafat got it wrong. He thought that by allowing terrorism against Israel, he would gain more, and this, of course, created an atmosphere of repulsive one. I would say that at a certain moment, it was Ehud Barak, the Labour the leader, who said that there is no partner. I mean, he was the one who said that. What is, in my view, what is happening in the last since Oslo? I think that there is a need for a change in the leadership. I mean, you know, it's like the people of Israel in the Sinai. die at the time. We spent 40 years in order to bring a new generation. There's a new generation that is waiting to inherit this Palestinian Authority, which is right now completely corrupted and has done nothing since October 95.
And we will talk about the future right after the break, but as we're nearing the end of the first part of our debate, gentlemen, Mahmoud Abbas, no matter how you look at it, is relatively moderate, pragmatist, believes in diplomacy, at least at the basic level, but zero achievements when it comes to the political dialogue vis-a-vis Israel. If Arafat's legacy was the Oslo Accords to an extent, what would be Abbas's legacy? Briefly, please, gentlemen, let's try and get all of you to chime in. Mr. Al-Ajrami, please.
I know that President Mahmoud Abbas is the most moderate leader in the Palestinian leadership and Palestinian Authority, but unfortunately in his period there is nothing move to a breakthrough in negotiations, because there was a change in Israel and almost all Israeli governments except Ehud Olmert government doesn't mean to even move one step towards peaceful agreement with the Palestinians.
Yeah.
And because of that, President Mahmoud Abbas lost support and the credibility because he didn't succeed to manage the peace process and to achieve any agreement with Israel. And also there was extremist atmosphere in Israel, and it affected the Palestinian status.
Different components. Sinijlawi, very briefly, if you can, before we take a break.
Well, I think President Abbas will be remembered as the leader that has kept the division between Gaza and the West Bank. He will be remembered as the leader that kept and has done nothing to prevent the division of Fatah to 1 million pieces. He will be seen as the leader who has deprived the Palestinians from the right to democracy. He has been employing himself for 17 years to be the president, and even though there is a mass call for elections, he's avoiding this. He will be seen as
yes. Well, gentlemen, we must take a short break now, but all of you are staying with us for the second part of our debate. Right after the break, the present and more importantly, the future. Dr. Jacques, Neriah, Sinijlawi, Ashraf, Al-Ajrami, don't go anywhere. Dear viewers, we'll be back in a few minutes with the rest of the summit. Welcome back to the summit. Still with us, retired Colonel Dr. Jacques, Neriah, Sinijlawi, and Ashraf, Al-Ajrami. Thank you, gentlemen, very much for staying with us. We're also staying on topic, but before we dive back into the conversation, let's take a listen to I-24 News' Middle East Now host, Jacob Alon, and his experience from the events that shaped Palestinian politics 4 decades ago. Let's take a listen.
PLO was obviously defeated, but they tried to put the best face on it. They wore fresh uniforms. They had red kafiyas, all of them, holding their rifles on these crowded trucks. And the trucks then drove slowly all these people to those huge cruise liners from Greece or Cyprus. Big holiday white cruise ships, and the PLO people boarded ship after ship after ship, and they were coming into the port on the way to Tunis. While on the roof, snipers were still shooting from West Beirut, and Israeli intelligence people were there with huge telescopes taking pictures of each and every PLO person that was boarding the ships. That was going on for most of the day, and then the PLO moved to Tunis. The PLO and Yasser Arafat stayed in Tunis for about a decade, and then roughly about 10 years later, I found myself reporting live from Gaza when Yasser Arafat came back. 10 years later, between Beirut and Gaza, and the rest is history, of course.
Yeah, so let's get to it, gentlemen, and kickstart this part of the debate with another quick-fire 30-second round each. The day after Abbas, what are the possible succession scenarios? Mr. Sinijlawi, please take the lead.
Any leadership after Abbas will come only through elections. I can see President Abbas as the last leader from those people who came, those Palestinians who came from abroad. I can see a young, fresh generation, the local leadership coming up. I can see a new Fatah rising, a Fatah that is depending more on local, genuine leadership that is attached to the street. People like Marwan Barghouti, people like Jibril Joub, Hamad Dahlan, Nasser Qudwa. I can see a young generation rising up through elections.
Ashraf, Al-Ajrami, your thoughts?
I think it depends on the Fatah movement. If Fatah will manage to choose a candidate, maybe immediately after Abu Mazen for interim period, it will be very important and okay. If Fatah cannot manage to choose one candidate, it will be a problem within the Fatah movement and the Palestinian national movement, and will be a problem even with Hamas movement. So the period after President Mahmoud Abbas is very essential.
Yes, Dr. Jacques Neriah, your take?
Well, the demise of Abbas will certainly herald an era of trouble, of civil strife, of instability, and I think that will be a big fight between Hamas and Fatah on the authority in the territories. It will also depend to what extent the Shabak, the Israeli Secret Service, will cooperate with the existing or the leadership. And I think, as far as Israel is concerned, I mean, they can stay there without elections for another 20 years. We don't need that because they know, but by the time that you have elections, it will be free elections. Hamas will be the one that will rule on the ground. This is certainly the fact that is waiting for us.
Yeah, so please feel free to interact from this point onwards, dear panelists. And Dr. Neriah, speaking of the point you just made on Hamas, looking back at the most recent campaign, Operation Breaking Dawn, can we say that both when it comes to Israel's perception or approach vis-a-vis Hamas, and when it comes to Hamas's handling of the situation, Hamas is paving its way to become the new Palestinian Authority?
Well, we are making mistakes after mistakes, and I think that basically we had to strengthen the Palestinian Authority, and instead of that, because we don't want, the Israeli government doesn't want a solution, or right now is not interested in negotiating another solution, another agreement with the Palestinians, so we prefer to separate between Gaza and the West Bank. And what happened, in fact, is that we have created an interlocutor, a new one, and who is now saying that without him there will be nothing that will be achieved by Israel, and he's holding Israel in a way hostage of what's going on in the West Bank and what's going on in Gaza. And this is a new equation, and Hamas also is of course the ally of Hezbollah, the ally of don't be fooled of the Islamic Jihad also. So this is the situation where we are today, and had the Arafat would be still living, I think that this situation would not have been created. Arafat was strong enough in order to deal with these issues, while Abbas is different, completely different.
Yes, and Ashraf, Al-Ajrami, you've alluded to that earlier, the Palestinian global standing. Did the Palestinians lose their international clout? I will ask it that bluntly.
I think the Palestinian unity is very important and essential to have a important role within the international community and with the regional forces. And I think it also depends on Israel. Israel tries all the time to keep the division between Gaza Strip and West Bank, and even didn't give the President Mahmoud Abbas the opportunity to go to elections, because one one problem was in East Jerusalem, and the other one is not to accept Hamas if Hamas will win in the elections. So it is a problem for us to be engaged in this change in the region and the international community by this division and the very bad situation we pass nowadays.
Yeah, the recurring question of if and when negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians begin, who is the Palestinian entity to conduct those negotiations? In summer, Sinijlawi, we can't ignore the Israeli political climate, yet another round of elections. What government the Palestinians would like to see in Israel? Does it even matter to them? Is there a difference between Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid and Benjamin Netanyahu?
Well, what concerns me more is what kind of future government we will have as Palestinians. I don't care what kind of government the Israeli will elect, because the Palestinian strategy is defined by the Palestinian leadership. But I think what has been mentioned, that the Shin Bet is keeping the chaos in the West Bank because they would like to keep the split and not to go to the negotiation table. This is a gambling. They are gambling, and the risk is on the life of a lot of innocent Israelis and Palestinians. It's a ticking bomb situation in the West Bank, and when it explodes, it will explode in the face of everybody, including the Israelis. The Shin Bet is taking a very wrong strategy, a broken strategy, and they will discover one day that they have been betraying their people by keeping mentioning that the solution to the Palestinian issue is security and is military. The solution to the Palestinian problem is only political, and it needs negotiation, and negotiation needs a representative, a partner that has the support of the street. And the only way we can achieve this is by elections. I don't think that Hamas will win any coming elections. Hamas even has been losing a lot of its power in the streets of Gaza because the Palestinian people are a moderate people. They would like to see a moderate leadership. They would like to see progress in their life. And everybody knows that electing Hamas will bring everybody to a deadlock. The Palestinian people are smart. They will elect a representative, moderate, young leadership that is capable to be able to develop a strategy that will talk to the reality, the new reality, the Abraham Accords, what's happening around us.
Absolutely. A changing reality and a dire need of rejuvenation in the leadership from all those parties involved.